Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're looking at the possibility of how to use certain kinds of figures, and the ones we're going to try and use are these guys right here. These are probably the least able to be used, these guys standing at attention. And you can see that we've already cut the one of the rifles off to prepare this guy to hold a flag. And if you want to see what that looks like, I don't know if I have an example right away. Here's one. This is an example of what that looks like. Maximus, stop it. So this is an example of what the guy looks like once he gets the flag put in. So you can imagine right? And this guy is going to be with a whole bunch of soldiers, so he would be like this. So like that kind of configuration. And then there would be another rank behind those guys. In this case, we're going to probably want to have the same shape because of the way they look. And in this case also, the guy's going to be in the middle of the unit, again because of the way the unit presents itself when all the figures are put in. So that's kind of what we're looking at for creating a unit of the guys that are standing. Now if you want to see what that looks like, I can't show it to you, but here is an example. The guy would be standing here, and then all his friends would be standing next to him. So there's the front rank, and then you take this guy out of the middle and you put in your flag holder guy. So that's generally the idea. So don't really know if that's worth working on, because in the end there is only about 3 battalions, regiments if you will, of these guys. And it's kind of hard to say, well, is it worth putting these guys on the table, on the war game table, because they're at attention, they're not doing anything. They're standing absolutely, they look like they're standing absolutely still. They're like they're on guard duty. So these are kind of the throwaway figures that we really can't use. The best thing you can probably use them for is maybe, as I've shown here, standing at attention, holding the flag. And in other units that might be useful. Especially guys that might be in the firing position, all the ranks firing. These guys that are standing up might be okay to hold a flag. So it's really hard to say. If you take that away and you give this then some perspective, here's a guy that is basically advancing with the flag. Now I believe this was the guy advancing with the bayoneted rifle pointing down, kind of a useless pose for a guy to be in. So we took obviously the rifle away, and we've substituted the bristle from a shot broom, plastic bristle. So that's what it looks like, and it's very effective. There's no question about it. That's an excellent looking figure because of his pose for holding a flag. And it's just too bad that they didn't make, or that nobody considers making an entire box full of these guys, because you'd buy it once and that'd be all the men you'd need. Or at least if they would have quite a few of those figures, then it would be worth it. So that's that, and you can see that I've got 2 of these guys, which means at some point I must have bought 2 boxes, or that this is one box. I'm not entirely sure of probably IMEX men, maybe IMEX. The Eshi figures I have not bought because they just don't work. Their sculpts, for the most part, are not usable. They're just old and sad, and I applaud their attempt to make the figures to begin with, but they're just not. They're not useful. Many of the figures are holding the rifle incorrectly, and it just looks really bad when you take photographs, especially. They look very junior, if you will. So that's what these two guys are doing. There's other guys like I've shown. Here's a without being touched. This is a guy that comes in the kit. This is, I believe, an artillery Confederate running with a flag that's far too small, even for the size of the Confederate flags. I don't know where they did their research, but this is nothing but a flag for communicating, maybe. I don't know. But certainly unit flags were not that small. That is very small. Almost by the dimensions here, 1/3 too small. So again, the figure's fine. He's running. And when we get to a chance, we just obviously snip that off and put in our own, which we've done, as you've seen, multiple times, and very successful at that. So it looks like I've got two of those guys, so that'll be happening. Here's an example of, I believe, the IMAX guy I covered in the other video, running with a shouldered pistol, the shoulder stock pistol, kind of a useless figure, but we've moved his flag to be carried in his right arm, which is appropriate and much better figure. It's not, the angle isn't crazy, so that's a much better useful. Here's an example of a marching, I believe this is Eschi, figure, and we've converted him to holding a flag as well. So these may have been covered in the other video. Here's an example of a Union guy, Confederate, the cavalryman with the shouldered, the pistol stock weapon, which is silly. So this is an example of Union guy, Illinois unit. Another marching guy example. Okay, you can see that you could just go on. And here again, another one, shoulder stock pistol guy. Another Confederate marching guy. You'll notice there's a difference about this figure. Look at the hat. So we were successful in swapping some hats. We left the heads, we swapped the hats. It was a little bit easier to swap hats than entire heads. We may at some point, because we've discovered this resin type of glue, which is activated by infrared, that it turns out to be extremely effective adhesive. And so what we did is we just swapped the hats. We could do the entire head, but we'll see. For now, it's just the hat. And the guy worked very well. You can see that. Very effective figure. Okay, so that is the situation with all those guys. And the flags and everything. And this is another bin I wanted to show you of extra figures. We keep these command figures, and the cavalry, dismounted cavalryman, as we showed earlier, that's pointless, because he's in the box, but he's not in the cavalry box, he's in the infantry box. But it's a cavalryman who's holding a carbine, and he has a sword, and it's pretty much not really a good pose for anything, so we're going to plan to use him as a flag holder, which we've done in the past. So the guy's pretty good for that. Or swapping hats, because he has a slouch hat, which is fine. We could take his head off, swap it with a guy who's got a kepi. And we could do that as much as we want, because we, again, like I said, found that really good resin glue. Okay, so that's that. That's a quick little video. And, oh, I wanted to show you the result of some of the other swapping that we did. Here are the hats that we swapped with kepis. Examples. The guys look like this, and they now look like that. So it was a very effective thing. I'm glad we did it, because it gives the figure new life. And hopefully, well, it's never going to happen, but it would be nice if somebody would provide heads with slouch hats, because there's way too many, in my mind, there's way too many kepis in these 172 figure boxes. There should be far more slouch hats and hats of non-kepi shape especially for the Western theater, where both sides almost were identical, except one was blue and one was gray. Although there may have been a vast majority of kepis, the truth is the slouch hat was also very common because it wasn't, say, strictly part of the uniform, but it was the person's preference, and they allowed it to happen. The person kept the hat, and there you are. So maybe later on in the war, the regulations were being more strict, and they told everybody, look, you got to wear a kepi. Why? Because it's just what we want. We need to have the uniformity, and besides, your own personal hat is wearing out. It looks terrible, and we don't want our troops to go marching through enemy territory looking like vagabonds. So hence the reason why at some point they might say 1863, 4 or 5, get rid of the slouch hat and become more standardized. Use the kepi of the Federal Army. So that's that. And what you can't see off camera are up to 9 and 10 regiments ready to be put onto tongue depressors, and then from the tongue depressor painted up and finalized into full battalions. So after recovering all these figures from their clear bases, an example here of a clear base, we've cleaned it. You can see that the residue is very acceptable. The hot glue did not leave anything that couldn't be removed, and the clear base was not damaged at all. So a little bit of scraping, you can barely notice it though when you put the plate back on the surface. And so we've got all these bases. We've got more clear bases. We've got as many regiments as we need to create a pretty good size battle, even though we're currently in a 2 by 2 foot size battle idiom, and we are preparing for the future, saving the situation with COVID-19 of having people get together and playing a very large Civil War game. Unfortunately, yes, it's true, the political situation with the Civil War and the Confederate flag and all that is interfering, but we don't adhere to any particular politics in war games like people generally don't, because it is not about politics. It is about a tactical challenge, a tactical struggle of military of tactics in the military realm, the strategy and tactics of military operations, not their political ramifications or implications. We leave that out. A lot of people do because it is not part of the, if you again, I'll say idiom. It's part of another discussion. But this is all about history, the war, the conflict, the combat, and the tactics used to maneuver large armies in the field. And what flag they carried is immaterial. They could be carrying a black flag, a white flag, a pink flag. It doesn't matter. The history shows us that they carried a certain flag, and that is what we are doing. We are trying to represent history. We don't need to show the offensive Confederate stars and bars, but the other Confederate flags can certainly be used. If you'll also notice, or you have in the past, the majority of our flags, however, are state flags. We don't actually show the American United States flag, and we don't normally show the Confederate stars and bars or the original Confederate States flag either. We are showing just the states, and that, if anything, is our point of view. It is that it is a war between the states. The Southerners had the interesting perspective that it was called the War of Northern Aggression, which isn't entirely true, because it really wasn't Northern aggression. The Confederates were coerced or chose to fire on Fort Sumter, and they started the conflict. That's the way it started. Unless there's something else I don't know, as far as I know, that is how the war started. They fired first, and so therefore they drew, if you will, first blood. So that is it. That is where we are going, and as you will see over the next months, this is going to evolve into a much greater series of videos, including American Revolution, which has, up until the COVID-19 situation, and forgetting about the political, just as coincidental, that we were starting to recreate and rebase the American Civil War figures at the time of all this upheaval. And we are going to continue with that. and if you will, save the 172 armies and make them far better than they were, and including fort sieges and fort artillery and bombardments and things we don't normally see on the game table, we will be getting into. But I said American Revolution is also on its way. That will be another series. Napoleonics, 1809 is our preference. So that is what we will be also delving into. And of course, World War II miniatures. Whether or not it's on a 2x2 or a 4x4 table of something of that nature, we don't know yet. But certainly those eras and the Middle Ages, medieval and ancients, will also be part of our next coming videos all this year and into 2021 as well. So check back often, and good luck, stay safe, and enjoy what we're working on.